Welcome to Second Half Conversations. I'm your host, Sondra Ziegler. This is a space to discuss all kinds of topics about the second half of life, from complicated legal topics like wealth protection and business succession planning that we break down in a practical way, to long-term care planning and care navigation when you have a loved one on a care journey, to leaning into fully experiencing new seasons of life, of work, and relationships. Our team and guests are here to equip you to take full advantage of where you're at. Because if done right, the second half is the better half. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Second Half Conversations. I'm your host, Sondra Ziegler, Executive Director of Ziegler Estate Law Group. Our mission is to provide a roadmap for families navigating the complicated journey that is the second half of life so that they can protect what they've built and preserve their legacy. Today, I am joined by Morgan Marx, Talia, and Mindy Gallina of Heritage Wealth Alliance. And we are going to be talking about the retirement risk that no one wants to talk about and how it can quietly unravel a carefully crafted estate plan if you don't include this. But before we get to that, I love to ask people their why. How did you become a certified financial planner, Morgan Marx? And then I would love for you, Talia, to tell us your why. How did you get into this work? And Mindy Gallina, tell us what drew you to financial planning and this area of financial planning in particular. And I'd also just love to hear the inside scoop of how you ladies got together and joined forces.
Yeah, Sondra, thank you. So we're super excited to be here. I think for me, my why is deeply personal. And it goes back to, growing up. I'm from a small town in Kansas, and we didn't really have access to what I would say is a whole lot of information. I found that over the course of my career that talking about finances and legacy planning and how to care for loved ones, it's not really something that families discuss openly. And it's really kind of like hidden and it's not something that, at least in our family, and I know a lot of families that we've worked with, is really open to discuss. And these things are so big and so impactful on generational wealth that when I experienced not just once, but unfortunately twice with both of my grandmothers having to enter into different forms of long-term care, and that journey looks so different. And the outcome ended up, unfortunately, being the same, where a lot of the options that were available to us, because there was no pre-planning that was done, were really stripped away. And we had very limited options. And it's something that I knew going forward for the rest of our family that I didn't want that to be the case anymore, and that there had to be something that we should be doing. And I am just as guilty as most financial advisors that, that's kind of a part you skim over until you need it. And, you look at the financials and you think, hey, everything's okay. But then when you actually do the math and you do the planning work, you find out that there's a much better way to tackle it. And if you're not consciously putting in effort to address it, then you're not doing your fiduciary duty to your clients. And at least identifying the certain pitfalls that could be present in their planning work. So my journey into the second half strategies, if you will, really resonates from deeply personal experiences within my own family, that I wanted to make sure that I educated myself, because knowledge is power. And now that I do have that education and have my certified financial planner certification, I feel like I'm better equipped now to prepare our families for what they don't know.
Morgan, you said something that I would like our listeners to understand. You mentioned fiduciary duty. Can you explain to us what that is and why it's important?
Yeah, so a fiduciary duty is that I have to put our client and prospective clients' interest above all else. And so we come at it from an approach that no matter what the answer is, we are going to provide you with that information so that you can make an informed decision. And so, very, similar, Sondra, to Nathan and the crew that you have there, we also are fiduciaries and have that legal liability to our clients to make sure that the advice that we are giving is in their best interest.
Okay. Yeah. And that is one of the reasons among many that we love working with y'all is that we know if we have a client who does not already have an advisor and they're looking to us, who should I call? If they've gotten to this point in their lives and they're like, my asset picture is just more complicated than it used to be, and I would like some help. I would like help with retirement planning, or I'd like help with income planning for retirement, or maybe they have formed a trust and they're putting assets in the trust, and now's the time to actually get a professional involved. We love to call y'all because we know that, and you hit the nail on the head, just like we have to act in our client's best interest, so do you. And so we have an umbrella, I feel like, of protection that way, where we're all working in that, we're all pulling in the same direction. We're not going to make recommendations that we wouldn't make to our own family members, and neither are you. If this were your mother, your father, your family member, and you were looking at, okay, how do we best manage these assets? You're going to be making those recommendations that are in their best interest. So important. So Talia, tell us how you got into financial planning and advising, and how you got together with Morgan and Mindy in this endeavor.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to graduate from Bryant actually a year early. So I was a COVID high school grad, and really did not know what I wanted to do post graduation. I knew I was really interested in stats. I took AP stats in high school and I loved it. So I actually researched what is the best major to major in if you're interested in stats. So from that, I had chosen economics at Bryant University. And throughout my time at Bryant, I kind of still didn't really know which path I wanted to end up in. And my junior year of college, I had taken a class that was preparing individuals for the Series 7. And that really opened up my avenues of different routes for careers in the financial industry, because I always thought, oh, you need to go into the buy side of investment banking. I had interned at a firm in Boston. They won't be named, but I'd actually interned there starting my freshman year, and they kept inviting me back. So it was a total of 3 years that I was working for them. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to stay with them, live in Boston, go into investment research, and make buku dollars from being a post grad. And then I realized this is not at all what I wanted to do, especially from just looking at spreadsheets all day long and sitting in the cubicle for 80 hours just researching 3 companies. I said, okay, this is not for me. I really liked helping people. And by taking that class my junior year and opening my opportunities to enter into planning, and just getting my licensing, it really was a great path for me. And I really love what I do every single day because, like I said, it's really helping people. I was fortunate enough to be raised by a single dad, and him and his family came from Portugal and really actually started off with nothing, like literally $0. So growing up and hearing his perspective on money was always just a little different. It was something that he always talked about it more in you need to be doing XYZ to prepare to be better than what we had. And he always said, every generation that's here in the United States, we want better than what we had growing up. So thankfully, he put me in a position to help me to be able to go to school, go to college, and enter in a career path, which I always say, if I didn't enter this, I would be probably in a different spot from even just my day-to-day knowledge, because you learn so much by doing it, by learning about it. And I feel like I can better help both my friends, my peers, that are in the same age group as me, to be better confident and equipped, especially women, because most of us don't get told about different financial related topics. So my goal was really just to help other people feel more confident to make decisions that are actually going to better themselves, and not just feel manipulated into financial decisions because that's what their husbands or dads or brothers told them to do, or even their advisors told them to do, but it's because that's a decision that's going to really benefit them, and they feel educated and confident in that decision as well. You asked how I started working with Morgan, I think. So
Yes.
I started working with Morgan this past July, so July 2025. And I was so happy to be asked to be on her team. So I was doing kind of a combination of working for our firm, from the home office side. And then I knew I really wanted to enter into more of a planning and holistic planning route. I really love the work of George Kinder. George Kinder works on essentially doing life planning. So it's kind of what we do and what Morgan does, looking at the whole picture of somebody's lives. And when we're on client meetings, it's not just about, okay, here's the performance of the S&P 500 and this is how it's going to benefit you. It's actually, what are your goals? What are we doing to get there? And why is this valuable for you and your family? And Morgan has already been kind of doing the George Kinder method without even calling it that. So it was really a great fit, and I've been honored to learn from her as I'm in the pursuit of my CFP as well, to hopefully get that designation and sit for that exam next year.
Okay, I love that story. I love it started out as sort of a nerdy fascination with numbers, but then you realize, I really want to put this in service of people, that's your heart, is really to help people and educate them and equip them with knowledge that's going to enable them to make the best decisions. And that totally fits with what I know about Morgan and what we just heard in her story, and being motivated by her family's story, of not having that information and now wanting to equip people with that information and be able to plan for these life events that could, greatly impact their well-being, their savings. Okay, so Mindy, now I'm ready to hear your why. How did you get into this field?
Yeah, so I had a different trajectory than both Morgan and Talia. I actually, my husband and I both worked for quite some time for nonprofits. And we loved our work. We loved helping people. That was really just one of those things that it wasn't obviously a very lucrative job, but it was that was basically our passion. We loved people, loved helping them. But after 15 years of that, we both decided it was time to pivot. And, really there were a few factors that kind of led us to this decision. But one of the major ones, which is why I find this particular topic so important, is we were going to have to start taking care of my mother-in-law. So we both needed a different career that would have allowed us a little more flexibility so that we could be with her. So my husband went into Medicare. He's doing Medicare insurance. And then I went into the financial sector, initially starting out at a CPA firm, actually. And while that was not necessarily where I thought I would end up, I did love my clients and I loved the interaction that we had. And I was actually put in charge of helping the whole firm's clients get into payroll and all that type of thing. Well, that always led to other conversations. It always led to, should I do a 401k? Should I do a simple IRA? Should I contribute to my IRA? And I'm the one who's getting these questions. So I actually approached one of the managing partners of William Joseph and had mentioned, what was happening. And he's like, well, why don't you go get your license and then you can help them? And I thought, okay, me thinking it was going to be super easy. I'm like, sure, why not? That's fine. Somehow I got my license. And so that's just kind of how I initially started. But then I found out I really, really loved this. And I loved being able to get with them and help them just kind of figure out this and that, and, what's good for the company, what's good for them. It was so much fun. So when the opportunity arose for me to actually go into financial planning full time, I'm like, yeah, absolutely, totally want to do that. So I started kind of helping a couple of advisors for the firm, helping them with their clients while I'm building my own book, and then also doing back office work for William Joseph. And that just was like, it was scratching all of my itches, because I really got to have some fun, with my clients, and really got to get really close to them. But this is also now leading into the long-term care planning as well. And around that time, we ended up bringing my mother-in-law to live with us. So I have seen firsthand what an extended care situation can do to families when it happens, because it usually happens quickly, unexpectedly, and now you're in it. So I've seen the importance of planning ahead, and that's kind of what led me to Morgan. When I heard what Morgan was doing, a lot like Talia, I love the fact that she has such amazing relationships with her clients. And she is taking a look at the whole thing. And I loved that too, because the one thing about financial planning is it can very much stay in that silo. And a lot of planners never break out of the investment side of this job. And there is so much more to wealth and to wealth planning than just the investments. So to be able to now look at it on the whole spectrum, you're looking at tax implications, you're looking at, other assets outside of just investments. You're looking at long-term care, how that kind of an event would, affect the plan. So you're looking at all these different components all together, and you're looking at the client and going, okay, if this is your goal, this is where we need to go. And they love that, and they trust you. And I want to earn that trust. When I grow up, I want to be like Morgan. So that's why we ended up working together.
Well, thank you. And I can tell you from my perspective, I am so blessed to have these two wonderful ladies on our team, and very excited to be able to mentor them and to be able to show them what good planning entails, and that it does go beyond just, the paper and the numbers. It's about creating those relationships with your clients and really figuring out what their goals are and what their values are and what they envision their second half of life to look like. And a lot of times those conversations are not easy to have. And so it is an honor that we get to be the catalyst to those conversations that a lot of people just kind of shy away from.
Well, that's a great segue, actually, to circle back to our topic today, the retirement risk that no one wants to talk about. So, spoiler alert. So, I'm sure our listeners by now know we're talking about long-term care, and thinking about all of, Morgan and Mindy, your stories. My grandparents did not utilize long-term care. So I did not have that story in my own family. However, Nathan, in Nathan's family on both sides, he had grandparents who needed long-term care. And in one case, their savings were pretty well wiped out by the need for long-term care. In another instance, he has a sort of a great example of a horror story of how people in their later years or who are in long-term care can be vulnerable to being taken advantage of. So that's a whole nother podcast for another day. But the need to have good planning in place, to have good agents clearly delineated in good powers of attorney, all of that is part of a holistic plan, along with the financial aspect of it, of how are we going to pay for care if we need it. So let's just jump in, and I want to just throw it out there instead of assuming. Let's throw out the question, what is long-term care? And does Medicare pay for long-term care? Doesn't Medicare pay for long-term care?
That is a
Good
very
questions.
common misconception. And so, long-term care, when you think about the difference between your health insurance, so Medicare is health insurance for adults over the age of 65. And so when you have Medicare, there are certain things that Medicare will pay for, like your hospital visits, your rehabilitation services. But those are all what we consider short term or acute care. And those are conditions or illnesses that you or that your doctors would reasonably expect for you to get better from by way of treatments or medications, rehabilitation. Where we get into the conversation of long term care. And I know there's a lot of negative connotations when you say long term care, because immediately people almost think nursing home. And that's not always it. So we change the conversation from long-term care to extended care. And what that means is that when Medicare will no longer pay for your hospital rehabilitative services, and essentially when the assessments by the medical professionals come back that more than likely you will not be able to do certain activities of daily living. That is when you get into a scenario that is considered an extended long-term care event that you more than likely will not be fully recovering from and will need some assistance, depending severity is dependent, right? But you may not be able to fully function as you were prior to whatever event created it. So those are considered events or conditions that have an expected period of longer than a 90-day period. And so when you hear that Medicare will pay for the first 100 days, that's true if there's certain conditions that are met. And the average is much, much less than that Medicare actually pays for. And when a loved one, what we call it is plateaus. So let's say that it's not even more than likely an accident that gets them into there. I'll give, my grandmother as an example. She was living independently on her own. She went to go get up out of her chair and had a fall. And that fall, unfortunately, because she had osteoporosis. So for us ladies, that's a much bigger issue. That the osteoporosis in and of itself may not be the debilitating factor, but a fall could, lead into a long-term care event. And so when that happened, she was able to go to the hospital, had surgery, went into rehab, but she was never then able to actually go back and live independently because it was a cascade of events that led to that point. And so we found ourselves very quickly going from a situation, and we hear this from our clients all the time, that you go from a situation where the loved one is at home living independently, and then all of a sudden an accident is usually what ends up being the catalyst to get them into a facility and needing that long-term care. And so even though she was progressing and Medicare paid for quite a few days, there was a point that she plateaued and she wasn't getting better. And I remember getting the call saying, we don't have a choice anymore. We either figure out where grandma's going to be put because she can't go home, and we're going to have to figure out a way to how to pay for this. And I know, Sondra, you probably hear that story, almost identical story, all the time. But I can tell you from my own personal experience, it's terrifying not to know where all of your loved one's assets are, and then all of a sudden being responsible for how do we pay for this care? What is our budget? Like, do we even know how much money grandma even has? And so for the family, it's terrifying to try and make decisions for your loved one, not having all of that information available to you, and then having to try and piece together everything and doing the absolute best that you can. So when we kind of reverse here and we say people that actually have a plan for this, the experience for the families is so much different, because they have a dedicated and earmarked place that they know if something happens, that's where we're going to go. And as a fiduciary, we'll look at all the different aspects of how you could earmark those funds. But the point is to having a plan so that your loved ones are not put in a position that they have to try and scramble and figure it out.
Yes. So in our office doing legal planning that we call long-term care planning, we're looking at, do you have estate planning documents at all? If you do, when were they last updated? A lot of people have estate planning documents from when the kids were little and they haven't updated them. And so this is a new reality. Knowing that you have a long-term care journey changes a lot of things about what your estate planning should look like. And a lot of people may not know that because, I mean, think about it. If you have a typical couple and the husband and wife are each other's agents on their powers of attorney, well, guess what? If one of them is now incapacitated for some reason, or they have a chronic illness, they probably can't serve anymore as that first agent on the power of attorney for their spouse. So where I'm going with this is we have a set of planning that we do. It's new estate planning in that situation usually is what's called for, that recognizes the reality of a long-term care journey for one of the spouses and what changes need to be made in terms of who's going to make decisions for themselves and for the other spouse. But then also, how do we protect assets from the cost of care? What are the rules of Medicaid? Could we get eligible for that? All of that. But there's a whole financial part of this that you're talking about that shows up in terms of retirement risk. So how would you talk about, how can you help us understand the risk that long-term care, the need for long-term care is to your retirement and your security, that this is not just a healthcare issue, it's not just an estate planning issue, but where does it show up in your planning? Is it in cash flow planning, the security of the surviving spouse, legacy goals? Like, help us understand what you're helping that family navigate.
Yeah. And I think the answer is all of the above, right? And so we get so focused on getting to the top of the mountain, right? We want to retire. We want to make sure that we have enough money that's saved. And a lot of times we're able to get there just fine. But it's the journey on the way back down the mountain that is critical. And so when we talk about long-term care, should be a function of retirement income planning, because when you have a care event and you have to start paying $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, sometimes $10,000 a month for care, that first is going to come from your income. And so most retirees are on some form of either fixed income or receiving income from their investments, their required minimum distributions. And so when you no longer have enough income being generated from your assets, then what do you have to do? Then it no longer becomes an income conversation. It becomes a liquidation of your assets conversation. And that is where, depending on how long of a care journey and what the market is doing at that point in time, it could have pretty significant tax implications withdrawal rates more than likely will be a lot higher than they were intended to be. And you also run the risk of, the market. What is it doing? And so if that's where we're planning on pulling, our funds from, what's the market doing at that time? Are we, in a time where we have, trade wars going on and some of those things, or are we in a boom? There's tax implications that can be pretty hefty. But then also there's a lot of inefficiencies when you do it that way. You are dollar for dollar making sure that you are using and funding your own care, which that's one of the solutions that we look at, because if that is the case, and if that's what you want to do, we will plan for that. But the problem is that when you are talking retirement income, most planners are using CPI. They're not using the healthcare inflation rate, which is much higher. So you cannot commingle the funds that you have intended to potentially use for care down the road with your other funds, because the benchmarks are completely different. It needs a different rate of return consistently over a period of time that you may not need within your regular retirement income.
So it sounds like what you're describing to me is a separate bucket that we're looking at to fund long-term care. At least that's where my head's going, because you mentioned the CPI. That's the Consumer Price Index. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
And that's assuming a rate of growth in the costs, right? And so
Correct.
What you're saying is that healthcare costs are growing at a higher rate, right? Do you know what rate they're growing at currently?
Yeah. So your regular, financial planning more than likely uses around 3%. Obviously inflation, has been a little bit higher. And Talia, you may be able to touch on this. She gives a presentation to our clients every quarter about inflation. So Talia, do you want to touch on what regular consumer inflation is looking like right now?
Yeah, as of March, when we had our last CPI numbers reported, it was about 3.5%. Part of that also has to do with it's gone a little higher now because of what we're facing, unfortunately, with the tensions in Iran. Gas prices have only continued to gone up, and that pushed up inflation. But when we take a look at why we use 3%, it's because we're really looking at the 30-year average. So when we track inflation over a 30-year period of time, it's going to go up, it's going to go down. The Federal Reserve has a 2% target, but that 3% is really the sweet spot of what we've been seeing over that course of time.
So over the last couple years, it's been considerably higher than that, hasn't it? Or is that not true?
During 2021 and 2022, yeah, it was closer to the fours. So when we're taking a look at running healthcare assumptions at 5% and regular inflation is at 4%, it probably would have been a lot higher if we were looking at this back in 2021 or 2022. And we know even though we run it as a 5% as well for inflation, the cost there's a crisis in general in healthcare in the United States, especially those working in those industries. So if those individuals are seeking more of a demand and they want higher compensation, it's going to raise the cost of healthcare even more than that 5% potential that we're budgeting for. So our goal too as planners is constantly monitoring it and say, hey, do we need to make changes? Because that 5% right now may be 6% next year.
Absolutely. Okay, so tell me, when you're helping people plan, and I would love it if you could think of some like real life examples, and they could be, horror stories, or they could be just regular examples. But when you're helping people plan, what are the major categories of solutions that you're going to consider when we're talking about preparing to pay for long-term care?
Mm-hmm. So being fiduciary planners, we are unbiased in what the solution or the end result is. And so the first thing that we take a look at is just as is. If you did absolutely nothing to change what you're doing, what does that look like? And are you okay with the results if we plug in a long-term care scenario? And I also want to mention that when we are doing these projections, we're using tools to be able to actually help us um, get a really good sense of what a potential long-term care journey could look like for you as an individual. Mindy, I think if you want to touch base on what our assessment is and then what we do with that to help us figure out, are we going based on averages, or how do we come up with what number are we even shooting for?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, we do a health and lifestyle assessment on all of our clients when we're talking about looking into what an extended care situation would look like, because we don't want to just stick with averages. We want to know specifically what what may happen to our client down the road. What would that situation look like? So, do they have Alzheimer's, dementia in the family? Have they had cancer in the family? How much do they exercise? How many vegetables do they eat every day? All these important questions that kind of give us a good idea of where their health and mental health may be at this time, and what it might do down the road. So when we go through that, what it actually does is give us a much more realistic picture of what could possibly happen down the road to them. So a lot of times what we're seeing is the national average for their sex, their age, their lifestyle is much shorter than what their actual average is. So we're seeing that these extended care situations could be pushed out a little bit longer, but also last longer as well. So when we're looking into this information, it gives us a good idea of, okay, it looks like, they may have, a few, like 4 to 6 years that we may have to plan for. And what is that going to look like for them? Are there things they can do now to better the odds that their later years they will be healthier longer? And so we give them those suggestions as well to see if, hey, maybe get up and take a walk every day. A lot of people are very sedentary, and it's amazing how just a little bit of motion every day can actually better your life for a lot longer. So we give them all this information, and then we look at, okay, here's the reality. How are we going to take this into account? What are we going to plan for? What is this going to look like?
I was just going to say, so many different advisors, they plan to, woman, you're going to live to 95, men, you're going to live to 90. And that's fine if they want to do that on their terms. But what we're seeing is that if you already know you have a family history of cancer, for instance, in your family, and let's say all the women in your family passed away in their 60s, you probably have a higher chance to pass away around that time frame than to live to 95. So obviously it's good to plan for, yeah, you may need funds to be stretched out for longer, but if that's not your specific need, then we're not going to plan for the averages. We're going to plan for you because you're not average.
So, okay, that's fascinating. So you're able to, you're collecting some information on their health history, on their family's health history. What was the age? I'm guessing you're asking, like, what was the age of your parents when they died?
Parents and grandparents actually will give us a really good idea of what longevity looks like in their family.
Wow. Okay. And so then you're able to then make a lot more specialized recommendations for how long does this portfolio need to last, and given the threats, the medical threats that are in that medical history, one type may dictate more long-term care than another. Like for instance, if you someone who they have a history of heart attack in their family, maybe that doesn't dictate a long care scenario, whereas early onset dementia certainly would. Okay, that is really fascinating. And it makes me wonder, just a little aside here, it makes me wonder, with all of the technology, the wearable technology that we have now, how it's going to sort of aid that effort to do better planning. Because I don't know, Mindy, when you said how active are they? How much exercise are they getting? How are they eating? When all of those factors feed in, now we have technology that really helps. I'm thinking about the, smart scales they can stand on that that measure their body composition, their muscle mass, and the wearables that tell you how many steps you're getting and how you're sleeping and all of that data. It really would be a shame to be doing financial planning that took none of that into account, that took none of what you're saying. I mean, I know pulling in that type of data would be like maybe a few years down the road, but doing what you're doing of let's really get at longevity in your family. What does that look like? What are the health issues that can arise in your family? And let's plan for that. Let's not pretend you're some statistical average out here.
Right.
Yeah. And we always like to say, we are anything but average, and we like to think our clients are anything but average. And so, if we're planning to averages, we're planning to failure. So it's very rare that we ever see when we talk about spousal protection, that we ever see two spouses who score the exact same. But what we do see is that when those protections aren't in place and the first spouse has a care journey, we see what impact planning or no planning has on the surviving spouse. And we can run all of these scenarios to say, if this were to happen, would you be proud of the financial situation that you left your spouse in?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And a lot of times there is enough for one, but not necessarily for both. And so just by making little tweaks or dedicating certain funds to address this issue, the trajectory and the lifestyle that the surviving spouse will have beyond, the passing of the first loved one is a dramatic difference. And it absolutely, breaks my heart because we deal with a lot of widows. And sometimes they're scared to death to do anything because they either didn't have a whole lot of input into the planning. They maybe don't know where their funds are. And even for, them trying to take care of the loved one while they're still living, they're afraid to spend money for the care. So they take that care on themselves. And then they end up dwindling their health because they are caring for their loved one in a capacity that they aren't trained for. They're not medical professionals. They, I can tell you just, even lifting my 100-pound dog, that's a lot. And to do that with a grown person, there's a wear and tear on the body. Whereas if you have a plan in place, you are more likely to call in the help when you need it because you know it's there. It's like having your health insurance. You're not going to pay for it out of pocket when you know your health insurance is going to cover it. So you'll go to the doctor, you'll go have the procedures to get, certain things fixed. But when you don't know whether it's covered or not covered, then maybe you won't go. Same thing. The quality of life for the well spouse and the ill spouse, the one that's going through the care journey, is a night and day difference when you have a plan in place and when you don't, no matter what the plan is.
That makes so much sense to me. I know what you said about the toll it takes on the health of the caregiving spouse is so true. So many times when people come to our office to get their legal planning in place and maybe to get help qualifying for Medicaid if they need help paying for long-term care and they need to go that route, or if it's part of a plan combined with other things, by the time they're sitting in our conference room, that caregiving spouse is past, or it could be a child, could be a spouse, could be a child. They are past exhausted. And if they have a plan, I can hear what you're saying. They have a permission structure now to, if they've planned for the cost of long-term care, to be able to spend the money and to get the help that they need. Because you're right, it's physically exhausting to take care of another adult human being. And a lot of them, I can't tell you how many times we do the planning, and this is just another reason for good legal planning that actually understands the long-term care space, that really understands what can happen on a care journey and has been down this road with a lot of families. It is not uncommon for the spouse, the well spouse, who is the caregiver spouse, to pass before the one who has dementia. In particular, we see that many times, because a lot of times the one who has dementia, if that's the issue, they're physically healthy. In many cases, it's uncanny to me. A lot of times they're physically healthier than their caregiving spouse, but the toll that caregiving takes when you have a spouse who's having this long journey with dementia, and they're at home for a long time, and maybe they don't get help with the care for a very long time, the well spouse can pass away first. Happens all the time. And if your estate planning doesn't anticipate that, it can be a big mess. If they were qualified for benefits under Medicaid, they can suddenly be disqualified by inheriting all the assets from the quote well spouse who passed first. So it can be a big mess, but I can, just on the psychological weight of having the how they're going to pay for care thought through and taken care of ahead of time with good, solid financial planning, I can only imagine how much that would help families.
Actually, Sondra, if I can just touch on that just briefly, just because that was my reality, having my mother-in-law living with us. Now, I'm an able-bodied, youngish adult, so I'm still going to take the young, the young word still.
Do it. Yes.
But my husband and I were the team, so it wasn't all on me. And in many cases, it's usually on just one spouse. So it was nice, at least my husband and I were able to do it together. But what that meant for us was waking up several times in the middle of the night because she couldn't toilet by herself. She couldn't transfer by herself. So it was getting up and helping her to do that. It was during the day. That was usually on me. Alan would get her up in the morning and get her going. But then during the day, while I'm working, I'm getting the calls to help her use the bathroom, or she needs this or she needs that. The amount of physical work that involved was unbelievable. And especially toward the end, because it was a lot of dead weight. It was 135 pounds of dead weight that he's in the back and I'm in the front. We're trying to get her up, trying to move her. It was so hard. I can't imagine a spouse trying to do this all on their own. That's a lot to deal with, and a lot of trauma to the body as you're trying to help that. And then the trauma to the mind, because then you also have the guilt because you can't do all the things that you want to do. You can't do all the things you need to do. It's just, there's so much involved in taking care of your loved ones when they're in this kind of situation. But especially when you add the dementia and Alzheimer's on top of that, that is a whole nother stress, because hopefully they're a kind dementia patient. That's not always the case. So then you're dealing with that, and it's just a lot. So if you can plan ahead for these situations where you are able to get assistance financially or medically with your loved ones, you're putting yourself and your loved ones in a much better position. They get better care, and you actually, you're doing better as well.
And giving them the dignity that they probably want and deserve. It's I know, even for my husband's grandfather, he just recently passed away. I remember when we were engaged, I had spent the night over at their house. His grandparents live with them, and his grandfather fell in the middle of the night getting out of the shower. He was naked. I went down to help his grandmother to pick him up. this is somebody that he just recently met me. I'm sure he didn't want me to be in that position of helping him, seeing him in that state, but there's no other option. So I know for so many individuals, just having that assistance, starting off even with home care, having the means to be able to help you get the support that you need in those situations, it's not all on you. And you're helping your loved one say, you know what, I'd rather have somebody on the outside come and help me rather than having my family see me in this position.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask y'all, this is just for any of you. Do you feel like, is it your experience that it's harder for men to have this conversation? It's harder for them to want to plan for long-term care. I mean, I was just going to throw it out there because I know what our experience is on the men versus women being willing to talk about this.
Yes. Well, I mean, aside from just the client conversations we've had, but just from personal experience, I really think that my father feels that when we start talking about this, we're actually planning his demise instead of planning for a future care event. I'm planning to keep him, like Talia said, planning to keep his dignity. And I think a lot of men don't want to think about the fact that they may not be around. It's not an easy conversation to have, whether you are a spouse, a professional, or a child.
Yeah. And I think we need to change the conversation to this is another thing that you are doing to protect your loved one. And so, even though we don't want to think about ever having ourselves to be in the situation that we would need that kind of care. But the reality is, over 70% of people will need some form of care in their lifetime. That means that 3 out of the 4 of us on this call are going to need some form of care. How long and to what extent? We don't know. I mean, I'd love to be the one that's not, right? But we don't know. And so by planning, just like you're planning for your retirement, you have to plan for these things because otherwise you're just leaving it to chance. And you're going to have a result if a care event happens, but it's going to be by default. And I don't know anybody who is successfully thriving in retirement by getting there by default and doing no planning. So this is no different. And if it's hard to have the conversation, and it is, because you have to think about your own health in years that are supposed to be your golden years. You're supposed to be having the fun. And it is hard to think of yourself in that aspect. It is like writing a love letter to your spouse and saying, if something happens to me, you're going to be okay. I've got this covered. And that is something that is so special. And I think it is a different way of viewing how we approach extended care, and that it's not about you. Yes, it is about maintaining your independence, your dignity, and receiving care in the way that you want to. But a lot of times it's about, how is this going to impact my family and my loved ones that are responsible for making these day-to-day decisions? And are they going to be responsible for doing the care for me? Or by having a plan in place, am I able then to alleviate that burden so that they can focus on enjoying the time that we have left together and just managing the day-to-day care that I receive?
That is so powerful. And, when I think about the question I asked you about men versus women, we had a gentleman one time say, well, I'd rather you just left me in the woods with a shotgun and a bear and we'll just see what happens than go to a nursing home. And I really do think that's a lot of men, how they think about it. But when you frame it differently for them and help them understand, this isn't just about what happens to you, because we know losing independence is frightening and maybe they don't want to think about it. But what you've said is absolutely true. that's a gift to your spouse. It really is a gift to your spouse to make sure that the planning is done, that there'll be the funds there. There's a plan in place to pay for not only the first spouse's care, but the second spouse's care if they have a need for care, because we know that the last to die is typically the woman. It's not always the case, but if there's going to be a spouse left impoverished by long-term care costs, it's very often going to be the wife. And so this is a very, very important issue. It's very important planning that you're doing. And I'm really looking forward to, in our next conversation, we're going to talk about how to go from crisis to clarity and how to build a personalized estate plan. And we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts and some of the strategies that you guys use every day to help families plan for the cost of long-term care and have security. But before we go, I would love to do a little lightning round with y'all. And so tell me what you see as the most overlooked cost or the most common misconception that you encounter about long-term care. And it could be anything.
I think from my experience is the cost of care is drastically underestimated a lot of times, but then where your care journey begins and how you can use those funds is also misunderstood. And it's no longer a conversation of, long-term care insurance is typically what people think of in the way that they cover these kind of scenarios. And you pay and you pay and you pay and you pay. And if you don't use it, it's something that you never receive benefit from. However, there are so many different options now that we consider. And I think that is a common misconception, is that when people are planning for an extended care event, that they're not using the right inflation, they're not using the right length of time that somebody may need care, and then they're also not using the right tool for the job sometimes. And so that's why we, tailor and customize those plans, because there's so many things and ways that you can solve for this. It's exciting for us to be able to come up with all of these different ways to accomplish the, kind of solve the problem.
So it's a kind of a puzzle with each couple that you meet with. It's not a one size fits all approach that you're taking. So, okay, what would you say then is the best age for people to begin planning for this?
Mm-hmm. Mindy, do you want to tackle that one?
Now. Whatever age you are now. Actually, really, it comes down to, it's better to start planning sooner than later, because you never know when something could happen. You could get in a car accident, have a head injury, and next thing you know, you need help. You could end up with a chronic disease that you weren't expecting and you need help. So, really, there's never a bad time or a bad age in which to start planning.
And to throw the football back to you guys and what you do on the estate planning side, even just doing your basic estate planning documents, like your power of attorney, your healthcare power of attorney, your financial power of attorney, that's crucial, because I even had an experience with a friend my age. His mom just got dementia. She's in her 60s. And he was like, I don't even have a financial power of attorney for her. And now I'm responsible for making all these decisions. So even from somebody in their 20s, starting to think about for yourself, because when you start seeing your loved ones go through it, then you're like, okay, I want to be prepared so I don't have to deal with this down the road.
Yeah. And actually, we do see a lot of people now, and I'm sure you see it too, Sondra, that are in that sandwich generation. They still have kids at home, but now their parents are needing help. That's like the sweet spot, is when you see this starting to happen, take stock. What do I have in place? Do I want my children to go through this? How can I help them so that they're not put in this position that I'm now put in? It's always good to start looking at what do we need to do to avoid those mistakes down the road?
Well, I can't wait to dive into our next topic. So if you're listening to this conversation, join us for the next one, From Crisis to Clarity, Building a Personalized Elder Care Plan, because we're going to walk through what some of the strategies could be for your family, depending on your situation. What are some of the ways that Morgan and her team help families plan for the cost of long-term care as part of a holistic estate plan, as part of holistic financial planning. Thank you so much for helping us make a tough topic practical today, ladies. And if you are listening and you found this helpful, share it with a friend, because families usually face this for the first time in a crisis. And if you want a roadmap for the second half of life, that is exactly what we focus on at Ziegler Estate Law Group. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks so much, ladies.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
A quick reminder that today's conversation is for educational purposes only. It is not meant to be legal advice, because to give you legal advice, we need to meet with you and know your specific situation. Thanks again for joining us today for this conversation, and remember to make the second half the best half.